Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the TEDx Youth at Lake Olmsted. Thank you for joining us. I'm David Brown, and I'm a senior at Davidson Fine Arts, where my focuses are theater and visual arts, and I will be your MC for this event. Before we begin with our speakers, please enjoy this introduction video from TEDx.
Welcome to something special. Welcome to TEDx. This TEDx event is part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theaters, in workplaces, even in prisons, people gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put on today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out. And now, on with the show.
And now, please help me welcome our head organizer, Ria Verma.
Thank you, David. Welcome to the first ever TEDx Youth event here in Augusta, TEDx Youth at Lake Olmsted. All of you are here because you have an inquiring mind. You want to know the big ideas of the world and listen to interesting concepts. And as a student, I realized that sometimes our classrooms may not foster rich discussion. And sometimes we are left with unanswered questions. Upon reflection, I noticed and listened in class to the novel ideas, the sheer curiosity amongst my peers, and unique takes on overlooked issues. I had one too. But I came to find out that there were no local TEDx events here in Augusta, let alone for youth speakers. So I applied to organize a TEDx Youth event when I realized how empowering it must be to embrace and encourage advocacy and story sharing amongst our youth. But after getting a license to organize this event, I knew I couldn't do this alone. So I put together a solid team of the most selfless, hardworking, and resilient people I know. Mr. Sharma Pogula, Sydney Kelly, Madison Bruley, Sophie Zarudo, and Chloe Chong. TEDx Youth at Lake Olmsted was born, and the rest is history. This afternoon is about these big ideas, unanswered questions, and how we can change the world from our own backyard. Now I'd like to invite our volunteer team head for a few words on today's event, Sydney Kelly. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. I am so excited to see each and every one of you here today, ready to listen and learn. As Ria mentioned, we want you to step away from this event having grown as an individual and as a thinker. This being the first TEDx Youth event in Augusta, our goal was to create a platform for the younger generation that allows them to inspire each other and allows for the speakers to inspire you, our audience. Our event today is centered around 3 words: adapt, unite, and grow, all of which we feel embody the Augusta community. Over the last 2 years, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, this community has been forced to adapt, to unite, and to grow. But we really feel that Augusta has always embodied these words. When faced with adversity in trying times, we have united together and grown from our successes and failures. As you are listening to these talks today, I encourage you to use the notepads in front of you to write down concepts or ideas that you find interesting. With that being said, sit back, enjoy, learn, and most importantly, listen. Thank you.
Okay, let's give our organizers one more big round of applause, please. They have worked so hard to organize this event by choosing amazing speakers and an amazing MC. Just before we begin, a reminder to silence your cell phones, please, as to not distract our speakers today, and to save yourself the embarrassment of pretending it's not your phone. Our first speaker today is Alexis Allen. She is a junior from Wheeler High School with a love for chemistry and healthcare. Please join me in welcoming Alexis Allen with her talk, The Possibility of the Liposome.
Medical chaos. Now, while I'm sure this is a term we've all become relatively familiar with in light of recent, medical chaos, before pandemic craziness, 2004 was the initial defining year of what medical chaos truly embodied to me. Now, not only was the greatest first daughter my parents could have ever hoped for born, that first daughter being me, of course, my family was going through medical complication after medical complication. From my mom's blood condition to paying for a newborn baby me, there was just a lot going on, and my family was really going through it. Of course, I was a baby and whatnot during this time, so I don't personally have any memories and only really have the recollections of my family, but I do remember being very young when I first found out that 2004 wasn't just a special year because I was born, but 2004 was a special year because it also marked the end of my grandmother's chemotherapy treatment. My paternal grandmother, who I call Granny, was an extraordinary person. And as we all know, terrible things can happen to extraordinary people. In her case, that being a series of medical complications in the early 2000s, most notably being her diagnosis with breast cancer. From thinning hair to shorter and shorter face lengths, my baby book actually doubles as a physical documentation of the effects chemotherapy ended up having on my granny. And to anyone that knows anyone or knows personally what chemotherapy is like, you know that it's no joke of a drug. Chemotherapy is a process we use to stop the spread of cancerous tumors. But take a moment to think of every cell in your body that divides really, really fast. Maybe that's hair, blood, throat, digestive cells, anything along those lines. Just know that the speed of those cell divisions is similar enough to the speed of cancer cell divisions that chemotherapy cannot distinguish them from each other, meaning chemotherapy treats/kills both healthy and bad cells really, really well. And it was this access to chemotherapy that always kind of annoyed me because, yes, it was such a blessing, but it was also such a curse. I say blessing because she lived 15 or so years cancer-free, but a curse because it haunted her and the rest of our family every year since. I mean, from taking pills to help her torn up immune system, to having kidney complications, and just having some sort of new medical discrepancy practically every month since, chemotherapy, at least in my observations growing up, seemed like a life lengthener and not exactly like a life improver. And being the idealist that I am, I kind of always thought modern medicine should be so much better than this. And I mean, being the daughter of two biologists that I am, I coped in the only way I knew how to. I learned a lot of science. And honestly, more science than some teenage girls should be allowed to know, like obsessively learn science. But nonetheless, I actually took AP Chemistry last year and was introduced to this pathway of pharmacy, where I think I found the answer to this question of, shouldn't modern medicine be better? Now, the answer to this question lies in a really cool molecule we like to call the liposome. The liposome is a nanotransporter, so think of the smallest thing you've ever seen. Maybe a speck of dust, maybe that's a strand of hair, whatever it may be. The smallest thing the naked eye can see is roughly 4,000 times larger than the average liposome. And I know, it is really hard to picture this being 3D because it is so tiny, but it is in the sense that it's spherical and really similar to our cells' vesicles, meaning it has a hollow middle that can hold and transport drugs really, really well. But the cool part about the liposome is that even though it's manufactured, it actually mimics our cells in a variety of ways and not just this vesicalness. One of those ways being that it has a phospholipid outer layer that allows the liposome to be protected from our bodily environment, but then also to facilitate exchanges between our bodies and the liposome. And this membrane works with membrane proteins on the outside, and what they do is they allow the liposome to release the drugs inside of it exactly where they need to be. And it's this ability of the liposome to target specific areas in our body that make it such a great alternative to treating conditions like inflammation, nutrient deficiencies, and hopefully soon something as groundbreaking as HIV. Now, okay, this seems great and all, I know. What's the catch, right? And that lies in a few questions. So think of the last time you heard about what seems like a really neat molecule. Just think of the last time you saw a publication, an advertisement, just some sort of chatter about the liposome. I'm going to take a wild guess in that you haven't heard much about the liposome until now, and that you also might be wondering why you haven't heard about the liposome until now. And that answer lies in one key factor about the liposome, being that it's not accessible to the average consumer. Or, let's put it a little less eloquently, the liposome is not affordable. But think about it, that makes sense, kind of. It's expensive to manufacture such a complex and such a small molecule, and it's expensive to fund the science behind developing the molecule, and it's also expensive to make the liposome based on demand due to its really poor shelf life. Now, these three components, among, well, many other things, make the liposome expensive. But there's one other component, and it frustrates me, among many other people that could have access to the liposome, that being the margin of profit healthcare companies make off of selling the liposome to people like me and you. I believe that because the liposome is so versatile in its many uses, functions, purposes, different fluidities, sizes, on, that its price should be just as versatile. But, okay, currently the liposome, when you're combining it in some sort of cancer immunotherapy treatment, is roughly $200,000. And to put that into perspective, the median household income in America last year was $80,000. So 2 times the combined salaries of the average American family would not make the liposome a viable alternative to some form of treatment. But what if it could be? I believe that if healthcare companies were to reduce their margin of profit made off of the liposomes considerably, they could expand their audience. By expanding your audience, you can increase the number of consumers available to using your product. Increasing number of consumers can then increase sales, and increasing sales can increase potential for profit, making back the money lost initially when that margin was lowered. And this works because the liposome, as I said earlier, is made based on demand. Increased demand, increased productivity, and thus healthcare companies end up helping themselves by helping me and you. But okay, maybe the liposome isn't the kind of alternative you're looking for. Maybe you have some sort of condition that there isn't a liposome to treat. So let's apply this to the whole healthcare industry. By minimizing the current emphasis on profit and maximizing a new emphasis on people like me and you, healthcare companies could serve themselves, thus making access for all beneficial for all, meaning both the consumers and the producers benefit from healthcare expansion. Okay, that was kind of big and all-expansive, so let's draw it back a little bit. Let's get a little selfish. Let's talk about me here. What's neat about this is as I do my research about the liposome and as I learn more and more about the costs of different healthcare procedures, I continue to ask the question of, would the liposome have been a viable alternative to my granny's chemotherapy treatment back in 2004? And okay, the short answer is no. Most people with newborn babies don't exactly have $200,000 laying around, and my grandmother was not unique in the sense that she spoiled me a ton as a kid. I mean, it was great, and I'm so thankful for that. But that just means we didn't have, I guess, the price of a small house in suburban Atlanta laying around. But pretend we did. Pretend we had $200,000 to spend on some sort of liposomal therapy. The cool part about this hypothetical is that there actually is a liposome that works to help treat breast cancer patients, just like my granny. This liposome works with a drug called DOX, or doxorubicin, if you really want to get technical. And what DOX does is practically the same thing as chemo, except it has that liposomal specificity I talked about earlier, meaning it would only target cancer cells and not healthy cells, making it that life lengthener and life improver I always thought chemotherapy should be. And thus, this is a really great alternative, but a really inaccessible one, kind of ruling out the whole fun of that what if. But playing what if with healthcare procedures isn't a game unique to me at all. And finding out that so many people have questioned the outcomes of their treatments is exactly why I'm here today. We all deserve to live in a world free of questioning healthcare outcomes just because we couldn't afford any better or couldn't find any better. By ending the emphasis on profit and beginning a new emphasis on the people like my granny, we can expand healthcare access as wide as possible and allow everyone to feel the benefits of cool new modern medicine. And we can do this by expanding access, moving $1, and yeah, maybe even one really small molecule at a time. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexis. That information was molecule to me. Thank you. I knew that wouldn't eat just at the science fair. Our next speaker, Arjun Kohli, is a senior at Peachtree Ridge High School. With an aspiration in a quantitative neuroradiology career, that's so smart I can't even say it. Now let's welcome him as he comes up to answer the question, can artificial intelligence bring a human touch to precision medicine?
Over the past few years, many of my friends, teachers, relatives, and mentors have often asked me, Arjun, why is it that you're constantly poring over these spreadsheets, these data analytics, these graphs, these programming forums and code repositories when you claim that you wish to pursue a career in medicine? The answer to this question comes through some of my life experiences. Throughout my life, I have spent countless months in hospital, clinical, and healthcare environments, comforting loved ones through treatment processes for diseases like Parkinson's, leukemia, kidney failure, and Alzheimer's. Seeing what I have from these cases is the motivation that I have to implement these data analytics in my work, both now and in the future. Where did this obsession arise from? It came from dealing with the uncertainty of waiting weeks for countless lab examinations, test results, doctor's appointments, and all forms of medical diagnostics to be taken, interpreted, analyzed, and then communicated back to these patients through hurried voices by physicians who were already too burned out to continue giving the treatment that they give every day. This brings us to a broader topic in the status quo of healthcare. Every day in healthcare facilities across the world, after weeks of these tests and examinations, physicians sit down with their patients to finally debrief about their findings. Often, patients come to these conversations with their lives, their health, and the emotional health of their families at stake, only to be met with physicians who are dealing with workloads too massive for them to answer the infinite questions that follow. In fact, a study done by the Morning Consult just last year, a poll of 1,000 US healthcare workers on the adverse effects of healthcare shortages, found that nearly 4 in 5 physicians claimed that this healthcare shortage had been a significant impact to their work and their ability to perform at the level they need. An insurmountable workload that has caused physicians to become completely burned out, says the author of the study. Healthcare infrastructures such as these, completely marred by bureaucracy, oftentimes do not have what it takes to provide the precision treatment, the personalized care that modern medicine should strive to be. These healthcare infrastructures often do not look at patients' unique physiologies, their backgrounds, their genomic profiles, their proteomic profiles, in-depth analysis of imaging in determining courses of treatment. The current medical literature analyzing cancer, for example, has begun to realize that many of these cancers that we deal with are not single diseases, but rather arrays of hundreds of genetic disorders that all impact how the true cancer will play out for every patient that develops it. These physiologies need to stop being treated as single diseases that all demand the same treatment. And rather, perhaps, this data should be included. For example, kidney cancer, as you can see on the screen above me, is made up of nearly 20,000 genes that are altered with over 30,000 mutations for these patients. And yet, genes like SETD2, which was not even analyzed in clinical prognoses for clear cell renal cell carcinomas until around 10 years ago, seems to be significant enough to cause a nearly 50% decrease in patient survival over the span of 3 years. Lack of resources and time is no excuse. Minute abnormalities in patients' physiologies deserve to be taken into account when determining their treatment plans. I wanted to do something about this. Inspired by the story of one of my good friend's aunts, and also by the nearly 13,000 people per year like her that die due to kidney cancers worldwide, I took a data set of nearly 340 patients with over 60 clinical variables, 30,000 mutations, and 20,000 genes analyzed along with proteomic profiles, and wanted to find a way to consolidate all of this information into something that may be capable of answering how kidney cancer would develop. Taking these millions of data points, I would develop a neural network which would take all of these inputs, use millions of nodes procedurally generated, all with their own unique biases, all with their unique logic, in order to come to a consensus on an outcome as to when these patients' diseases would develop. The resulting algorithm was able to have 95% accuracy in determining patients' kidney cancer prognosis, the kidney cancer metastasis, and even development of cancers outside the original zone, up to 4 years in advance. Tools like this could be implemented in numerous diseases and could hold potentially the ability to allow our physicians, to equip our physicians with what they need to personalize treatment in the future. In a similar vein, neurodegenerative disease. Once I began looking into the true effects of neurodegenerative disease on American healthcare and the patients that develop it, I came to see things that severely worried me. For example, looking at multiple sclerosis, a demyelinating neurodegenerative disease, I saw that nearly 20% of patients diagnosed at UCLA and Cedars-Sinai, two of arguably the leading medical institutions of the United States in the past decade, were indeed misdiagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Analysis and quantification of cerebral structures using MRI has been known for years to hold significant value in prognosing and diagnosing these diseases, and yet whole brain quantification is something that remains a dream for clinical practice. Although radiologists are able to gain qualitative, subjective findings from their analysis of these scans, quantification, seeing just how much tissue is truly present in every single patient that takes a scan, is something that is excessively important and excessively powerful in treatment plans, and yet rarely does it ever happen in clinical implementation. For the past 3 years, I've been working to see how we can implement machine learning technologies to somehow make this quantification process, this neurodegenerative disease diagnosis process, more streamlined, more efficient, and more equitable, so that a patient living in a rural community in America can receive the same exact treatment that a patient would in a metropolitan city center in a university hospital, despite the need or availability of neuroradiologists. This result, an algorithm with 98% accuracy in classifying every form of tissue present in a patient scan. So why does it matter? In the future, technologies like the hyperfine portable MRI machine could be loaded with software such as this to provide neurodegenerative disease diagnostics in communities in which we have never seen them before. Places across the world, regardless of availability of medical centers, MRI machines, or neuroradiologists to analyze scans, could finally gain the capacity to diagnose patients' disorders and to also gain deep insights on how they may be fixed due to patients' unique structural profiles. Crumbling healthcare infrastructures, marred by bureaucracy, must begin to address these issues. As the world moves toward a more personalized and modernized medical system that claims that unique patient attributes are taken into account, perhaps technologies such as these could be the leading factor in determining whether or not we will be able to make sure these advances are equitable or not. Every patient that needs care should get it, regardless of availability of resources. In a similar vein to how agriculture was revolutionized through technology, exponentially increasing our capacity to provide for 8 billion people in the world today, with exponentially fewer people actually involved in the process of agriculture. Perhaps machine learning could do the same for medicine, allowing us to fill the demand gap in healthcare. This study, done even prior to the COVID-19 pandemic by the American Association of Medical Colleges, shows that regardless of however we approach it, healthcare demand will always stay ahead of healthcare supply. Regardless of how many neuroradiologists are pumped out by our university hospitals or residency training programs, we will always see this gap in healthcare up to 10 to 20 years in advance. So, my message to the Augusta community and global community today is to adapt, unite, and grow to secure the future of healthcare. We must adapt our healthcare infrastructures to implement these technologies as soon as possible. Every day that these patients are left without the treatment options that are available to patients outside of the rural communities which lack these resources, we lose people. We are losing patients who deserve the treatment that could be provided to them through these technologies. We need to unite in our call for healthcare equity so that every patient across the world could receive this form of care. And we need to grow our capacities to recognize patients' unique genomic, proteomic, ethnic, and familial backgrounds in order to form treatment processes. Thank you.
Personally, I would just like to say thank you to people like Urjan for being interested in the medical field, because if it were me, I would have to quote with my patients a Whoopi Goldberg saying, "Molly, you in danger, girl." But our next speaker is coming to help us answer the question of friendship. Daughter of a retired military lieutenant colonel, Amber Aubis is working to create a program at her school to help acquaint new students called Wolfpack Ambassadors. Now let's hear from her the answer to the question, what is friendship to military children?
We all remember getting ready for our first day of school. Getting our hair done, finding the perfect outfit, and buying all those pens and pencils we know will somehow magically disappear within a week. Many people get excited for their first day of school. But for military children, it's just a routine. Moving every 2 or 3 years, right after settling, being uprooted yet again for a sacrifice they don't even get recognized for. Feelings of loneliness and anxiety take root in their heart and change them. And on top of that, they worry about whether their parents are going to come home or not. Research from the American Society of Federal Health Professionals stated that adolescents with a deployed parent present increased levels of depressive symptoms compared with their civilian counterparts. Adolescents also show a worsening of social interaction with peers and a decrease in academic achievement overall. This is especially true in female adolescents and racial minorities. As a military child myself, I can attest for this. I used to struggle so much with stepping outside of my comfort zone because of the fear of being uprooted yet again. And although I only had to move 4 times, and mostly during my early childhood years, I have seen and studied these effects in my peers and in my family. And I've also worked with countless others to build a program at my school to help make military children feel welcome and help give them that first friend to guide them into a new environment. I understand what it's like to constantly feel uprooted and feel like nobody understands you or what you're going through. But I remember this one time when we were moving to Kentucky. This was the summer of 3rd grade. I was personally terrified of my first day of school. I had spent endless nights crying, worrying, feeling like I was never going to make any friends or fit in anywhere or make anybody new. I was honestly thinking it was just going to be me and my dog for the rest of my life. But while we were unpacking the moving truck, I spotted these girls across the street, and they were all kind of huddled into a little circle, giggling and laughing. But then this one girl boldly and confidently approached me and said, "Do you want to play with us?" And on the surface, I was all calm and collected, and I was smooth with it too. I was like, sure, I would love to. But underneath, I was honestly jumping for joy and doing a victory dance. Because at that moment, everything changed. All my fears and anxieties about what was to come vanished. They literally went poof in my head. Because I had made a friend, and I was no longer worried about whether I was going to fit in at school. I just hung out with my friends and I had a good time. I realized they understood what it was like to come into a new and unfamiliar place. Most of the girls in that group had moved 5 or 6 times already, and we were only 8. But they did what we typically do as military children: introduce ourselves, adapt into a new environment, and try to ease the fears of others with moving. My friend took me under her wing, and we began going to every new person's house that moved into the neighborhood, introducing ourselves and asking their kids if they wanted to play. Sometimes this was before the boxes were even moved out of the front lawn. And yes, we did play in the boxes. But we made sure, by their first day of school rolled around, they had a group of people to rely on and call us friends. Now, my friend ended up moving a year later, and I also ended up moving 2 years later. But I have never forgotten that moment and her impact on my life. I learned from her that sometimes smiling, waving at people in the hallway, asking them how their days are going, just being intentional with getting to know somebody could change how they see their situation. I also know that I occasionally check in on my friend and see how she's doing with life, because she honestly changed mine. And now everywhere I go, I try to continue her legacy, and I try to make new students feel welcome in a new environment. Now, you may be wondering, why am I telling you all this? All I ask is that when you see a new kid, welcome them into a new environment. You can do this by sitting with them at lunch, introducing them to others, asking them how their days are going. Sometimes this may take you stepping outside of your comfort zone and your friend groups, but acts like these can impact somebody a great deal and change their mindset on their new situation. I also ask that when you see a new kid, help them feel a part of the student body. When their time there may be temporary and short, just allow them to feel comfortable and loved in that new place. You can do this by inviting them to sit with you at pep rallies. Give them that school spirit we all know you all have. Allow them to feel connected in a new environment. I also ask that when you see somebody lonely and isolated, grab a group of friends and join them. Just make them feel noticed and heard. You may do this by inviting them into clubs and activities. When you are invited into clubs and activities, you meet people you never thought you would meet and bond with people you never thought you would ever meet or notice. But acts like these can change the way people see each other. My last thing I ask is that you allow us to be a more friendly and open society by just being kind to new students. A lot of times, a first friend or a kind word can go a great deal in impacting somebody and changing the way they see each other. Being greeted with smiles instead of frowns can change how other people see each other. And now, when I say smiles, I'm not talking about the creepy Mickey Mouse smile that everybody gives at Disney World. I'm talking about the truly genuine smile of just, I notice you, I see you, and you are loved here. Please allow us to make this a more friendly and open society and change the way we see each other and interact with each other. Thank you.
Okay, and now we're going to play a quick game. I need 2 volunteers. Could people raise their hands, please, to come up and volunteer? I cannot see anything past this light, so I can't see the volunteers. You two in the back, man waving his hand, and the man that's farther back waving his hand. Let's give them applause for volunteering, please. Thank you. You can just come stand here. Okay, and what are your names?
My name is Denzel Howard. I'm Lucas Patterson.
Okay, it's great to have you down here. So our game that we'll be playing today is a minute-to-win-it game of cup stacking. So you're going to take these cups and you're going to stack them in a pyramid and then unstack them. However, you only have a minute and you have to do it with one hand. So the winner of this game will receive a nice, fun prize, and there will be a timer on the screen. So can y'all just come step up here for me? Okay, and your time starts now. Okay. Okay. Denzel seems to be in the lead. Oh, or never mind, Lucas is in the lead. I'm just kidding. Oh, never mind. It was a good effort. It was a good effort. Just keep trying. Okay, you have 30 seconds. Yeah, I saw him trying to cheat. It's not okay. Not okay. Oh, okay. He's... Yeah. 15 seconds, and yes, it does matter how big the pyramid is. Or whoever has the highest pyramid. Okay. 4, 3, 2, 1. Great. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. I think the winner of that round was Denzel. So let's clap it up for Denzel. And so before you leave, let me ask you a question. So have y'all been enjoying this TEDx Youth event?
I have. Yes, I have too.
Any notable things that y'all have seen tonight?
I really enjoyed that part about going out and meeting new people because when I came to my school, I didn't really know anybody, and some people came up to me, and those people are who my friends are now. So.
And that's very important, very important. Thank you again, thank you again. Okay, can I get 2 more volunteers? It's difficult to see past these lights, y'all. It's difficult. Okay, what's your name?
Anshul Garapalli.
Okay, and we'll wait for her to say her name too. And what is your name?
Sarah Kilpatrick.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to separate these cups again just to avoid a situation that we had last time. And so your time will start now. Okay. Oh, Sarah's in the lead. Sarah seems to be in the lead. Okay, 40 seconds. Oh, she got it like really high. This is women in STEM. This is women in STEM right here. This is women in STEM. Oh, wow. Okay, 20 seconds. Wait, so you had one hand, though. And the time is up. The time is up. I think technically.
Yeah, I cheated.
Okay, she admitted to cheating. So.
He cheated first, but then I cheated.
Oh, then these are just some 2 team players, aren't they? Let's give them both a round of applause. Okay. And how have y'all been enjoying this event?
It's been good.
It's been really good. Yeah.
Any notable speakers?
I really liked learning about the liposomes. That was really interesting.
And any notable MCs, maybe?
Oh, I think you.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you. Let's hop them up one more time. Okay, now back to our speakers. Our next speaker, Dr. David P. Owen Jr., is a teacher and writer in many fields around Augusta. With a variety of interests, from literature to complexity theory, he is no stranger to the Word. Let's welcome him with his talk, The Word is Dead, Long Live the Word, Literature in the Digital Age.
As a teacher and student of literature, I can tell you that for many, many years now, I've been hearing about the death of the Word, about the way that books and writing and reading would fade, maybe even quickly, from a world increasingly filled with screens. For example, in the science fiction classic Neuromancer, William Gibson imagines for us a world in which we don't so much read about things as attach our consciousness to the matrix, basically. And the people who do still care about books and the written word are seen as antiquated, as sluggish in his terms. And maybe he's right. Who knows what the future holds for us. But I can't help but notice, first of all, that books are still with us. It's been a while now since we've had computers, and we don't seem to have entirely rid the world of books. I also notice that the people who make arguments about these things often do so, with words. And sometimes lots of words and really difficult, complex books. And I'd like to take you on a quick tour through some of those today. Sometimes the people who have these discussions seem to be split into 2 large camps. On one side, you have the people here represented by Sven Burkertz. And they seem to mourn the loss of a kind of literary Neverland past where we all sat around and read Henry James and talked about it. On the other side, you have people more like Janet Murray who think of literature of the future as being some kind of virtual reality video game type experience. But I think that probably somebody like Henry Jenkins, at least for a good long time, is the one who has it right. We'll have a kind of convergence culture where we have lots of things at once, existing side by side, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes actually pretty naturally. One of the things that definitely seems to be changing these days, though, is publishing. It's not hard to find someone in publishing talking about the industry dying off, or at least going through drastic changes. People lamenting that people don't seem to read anymore, at least buy books. Some of those people, though, don't seem depressed by this. They see it more as just the facts of the matter. Jeff Gomez is one of those. And though he does call his book Print is Dead, which sounds very dark, he is actually maybe excited about the new differences we'll see in publishing, too. He, for one, argues that it's simply the fact of the matter. What we often call digital natives these days grow up with books, at least in a different way than their parents and grandparents grew up with books. They have them as one option among very, very many for entertainment or learning or expression. And it maybe means we'll have to change the way we sell books, or if we sell books to people like this. But I also want to point out that a lot of what we talk about when we talk about publishing is the commercial aspect of books and of literature. Mostly what you hear people lamenting is the loss of a certain kind of power and control over publishing. For the longest time, maybe forever, anybody really who had the talent, or at least the desire to write or express, could do so. But publishing, especially on like a national scale, that required people with resources and power. And if you had the resources and power, you were the one who decided if someone who wrote was a writer, if someone who made music was a musician, if someone who made films was a filmmaker. And now that those tools of the publishing industry are so widely available to a lot of people, at least, with a good internet connection, it's unclear how these things will be navigated in the future, at least commercially. The actual act of writing as well, I think, is pretty inarguably different. Very few of us do very much with pen and paper anymore. Mostly what we mean by writing is typing, and I can tell you because I read lots of essays. And they mostly seem to have been typed. Now, I do agree that we maybe are seeing a loss in cohesion and linear thought of the kind that I think was easier when we wrote things by hand. But I'm not sure that it's all negative. Here, Burkertz does make a good point, that we used to think of writing things down as he calls it, a gesture towards permanence, as a way of preserving things, giving them a lasting and substantial quality that might even outlive us. And maybe as words are increasingly on screens, we lose some of that weight. We lose some of that substance. As things can be altered and changed and moved around with almost no work at all, maybe the word is a little more or a little less substantial than it used to be. However, not everyone thinks of it that way. There are plenty of people out there who argue that what has changed really is the tools with which we can work. That writers now get to be, as he calls them, more makers really than anything else. They can design, they can illustrate, they can do all kinds of things that weren't really possible for people who wanted to write before computers came along. I can't help, in fact, but think about the romantic poet William Blake, who seems to have arrived at this place a couple hundred years ago. He was every bit the multimedia artist. His illustrations are absolutely as important as the verses he wrote. And he was also really interested in trying to liberate the artist in a way that sounds surprisingly relevant today. He even devised a method of printing that he hoped would allow a writer or an artist to control the entire production of the work from the very first stages to the actual printing of the books without ever having to consult anybody else. And he's not alone. There are plenty of people these days who are interested in what literature can do and be in a digital age. And maybe we'll need to rethink what counts as literature and what it looks like. We also probably will need to read differently, or maybe even change what we mean by reading. For example, we have for a while now been talking about reading things like film. And maybe it's worth remembering that the word as well is a visual expression. We often don't talk about it that way, but in a visual world, I think there is still a place for the word. In fact, some of the people in electronic literature these days are producing things that, like Faith by Robert Kendall, are poems as you would recognize them, but they move. They're not quite animated, but they move and change. They require a little bit of participation. They are timed so that they are a multi-sensory, participatory act, but they are still very much under the artist's control. You're welcome to find this one on the internet. It's great. I do think it's also worth remembering, though, that a good story is probably always going to be a good story, just as Sarah Sloan tells us. It may not, in the long run, matter very much at all that computers have entered the discussion. However the stories come, they'll either be good or they won't. So what do we do about teaching the word these days? I think a lot of people wonder if we can even do it. I certainly hear English teachers worried that they're just going to be replaced. I'm not sure by what, but I want to return to that great dystopian picture of the death of books in Fahrenheit 451, one of my favorite covers, like they contain the matchsticks within them. But in any case, the part of it I want to point out is that the literature professor Faber in that book argues in a way that I think we don't often notice that it was never really the books. They aren't the thing themselves. They're just what brings the thing to us. And then the container, the medium, can change and still give us the thing that we want from it. And we can also find those things, as he points out, in lots of places, maybe if we demand it, or maybe if we learn to look harder. And so really what I think we need more than anything else these days is an attitude of revision. And yes, I mean we should fix our essays. But I also mean that we ought to take that same kind of attitude, that assuming that things are never quite done, that they can always be seen differently, that you can come back and improve, you can alter. I think we should take that attitude towards just about everything in the digital age. We should see it again each day new. And to have a true attitude of revision in literature and without means that the next page is always page one. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Owen. I guess you could say the word is alive and well. Our next speaker, Dia Garapalli, is a sophomore from Wheeler High School with a curiosity in science. She is here to help us figure out the biology behind a balanced life.
Was there ever a time when you wanted to check one thing on your phone, but found yourself scrolling mindlessly 40 minutes later? For me, this was the latter half of 2021. I felt trapped in my own cycle of school, homework, and almost no sleep. I'd finish a task not because of the knowledge I gained at the moment, but because of the break I promised myself after. I wasn't happy because all I wanted to do was sit on my phone and mindlessly scroll through social media. See, this all has to do with a chemical called dopamine. What do you picture in your mind when I say this word? Some of y'all, I'm guessing, may think of drugs or social media, which are both said to increase levels of dopamine. But let's talk about something that decreases levels of dopamine. Let's put the spotlight on Parkinson's disease. 2 years ago, my grandfather was diagnosed with Parkinson's. He initially went to the doctor because he was having trouble changing directions while moving. Towards the end of 2021, it got worse. His speech started slurring, and he needed help doing the tiniest of things, like getting up from a chair. If you're familiar with Parkinson's, you know that there is no cure. And my grandfather lives all the way in India, which is very far away, so I barely get to see him. But I found that researching the disease made me feel a lot closer to him. Understanding how and why it was affecting him and also learning some really relevant and impactful science along the way. Let me share it with you. Our bodies are made of trillions of cells, each with their own specified function. The cells in the brain are called neurons, and in order for these neurons to communicate with each other, they send little chemical signals to each other called neurotransmitters. Dopamine is a type of neurotransmitter used by these neurons to communicate. It is integral to everyday life and function, and when released, can also leave us feeling happier. And Parkinson's is a disease that mainly affects older people. And on the outside, it often just looks like hand tremors or slow movement, but it gets much more complicated inside. The substantia nigra is a tiny part of the brain that produces dopamine. And with people with Parkinson's, inside this substantia nigra, it's full of chaos. There's mutated protein spreading and inhibiting these neurons from producing the dopamine they need to survive. Scientists hypothesize that as these mutated proteins spread, Parkinson's gets worse. And this might sound weird, but I used to think dopamine was such a terrible thing. And I think it's just because I didn't truly know the real meaning of the real role it had in everyday life. But I just heard all these things, especially about our younger generation, how we're getting too much and it's causing all these bad things like addiction. I've heard of dopamine detoxes, which recommend taking a break from outside sources. So it really never occurred to me that this chemical was so integral to life itself. Realizing this was a pivotal moment in my life because it's when I fully realized how balance plays a role in everything. This moment is when I truly understood that I could change the way I lived just by changing my mindset. So, after realizing this, the whole mindlessly scrolling through social media thing got really old really fast. January was coming along, and honestly, I was so excited for 2022. On New Year's Eve, I decided for the entire month of January, and maybe even more, I was going to delete all social media. New year, new me, right? I was finally going to take initiative in being the best that I could be. And guess what? It worked so well. I started to wake up excited for school, excited for the new day, and to interact with my teachers and classmates and make the best of my day every day. The benefits this little change had on the way I thought and what my day-to-day life looked like were substantial. For me, all it took was a little self-motivation to take action. It was a problem I needed to solve. I was spending way too much time scrolling through social media. I knew I was better than that and made a promise to myself. Now, some of y'all may be thinking that if social media produces dopamine and people with Parkinson's lack it, can't they just go on social media or something? Unfortunately, it isn't that simple. See, people with Parkinson's don't have these neurons necessary to produce dopamine in the first place. Remember, the substantia nigra is very chaotic, and mutated proteins are inhibiting these neurons from producing dopamine. So something that typically produces dopamine, like social media, really has no effect on people with Parkinson's. Social media and Parkinson's are two extremes on a dopamine level spectrum. You have Parkinson's, which is just struggling to produce the normal amount of dopamine needed to live. And then there's social media, which is designed to produce the most dopamine possible with little to no work on your part. This is such an awesome metaphor for life because you can take something really good and necessary and make it harmful just by overusing it. I encourage you to do the same thing that I did with social media with anything you want in life. Because in the end, a balance in the brain is a balance in life. Thank you.
I really needed to hear that because it's very hard for me to live a balanced life being, perfect and amazing and well-rounded. So I really needed that. Thank you, Dia. Thank you, Dia. Our next speaker is a track star and a band kid at Lakeside High School. Today, she is here to inform us of the commonality of eating disorders in our youth today. Please welcome Lauren Coughlin with her talk, A Lackluster Education and a Lifetime of Effects, How Eating Disorders Shape the Adolescent Existence.
I was called fat for the first time when I was 10 years old. I was not yet old enough to ride in the front seat of a car, and I was called too big for my age. I weighed a mere 80 pounds at the time, and it only got worse. By age 11, I started to diet. I started to send my body into a calorie deficit and do harm that I was not aware of. I would start to hurt myself to the point where I couldn't do the activities that other kids could do because I was too tired. At age 12, one of my classmates told me that I looked like Big Bertha from the Marvel comics. If you don't know who that is, you should look it up. I did on my first ever cell phone and was mortified by what I saw. At age 13, I would start to notice the cruel comments made about me, such as, well, at least she has a good personality. At age 14, when I was just entering into high school, I would look at the girls around me and on social media and think, why can't I just look like them? Why can't I have a flat stomach? And why can't I have thigh gaps? Why can't I be like them? At age 15, I would start to notice more cruel comments, like, do you really want to eat that much? And you can't wear that and you know why. Everything had changed by age 16. At age 16, I'd start to feel guilty for eating. I'd start to feel guilty for feeling full at the end of the night. This guilt built and built over time until I couldn't deal with it anymore. And I threw up. I threw up in the shower everything I'd eaten that day. And I would not go on to eat for another day. I told myself that this would be the first and only time that this would happen, that this would never happen again. This wasn't true. It would continue again and again for 7 months. My eating disorder lasted from July of 2020 to January of 2021. 7 months in which I did irreparable damage to my body and hurt myself. And the worst of it was that for the first 3 months of this, I was unaware I had a problem. I was unaware that I had a problem because I wasn't educated on it. Sure, in your first year of high school, you go into your one and only health course of the 4 years you will spend there, and you learn about eating disorders. This learning consists of writing down vocabulary definitions for 2 days of words like anorexia and bulimia, taking a test, then moving on. A student never learns about the harsh realities of eating disorders. They never learn about the effects. They never learn about how anorexia can cause anemia and how prolonged bulimia can increase extremely your chances of having esophageal cancer. But the worst part of it all is that you never learn about the causes. A student never learns about how on social media we're presented with filters and Photoshop of what a woman should look like. A student never learns about how the lack of control in a person's life can cause the only thing they can control being their food. A student never learns about how one cruel comment that they make on a bad day to someone about their weight can cause a spiral of events. It can cause a lifetime of problems. Education on eating disorders is lacking, and it is not enough with the mental repercussions that come with it. It is not enough when since March of 2020, there's been a 20% increase in the amount of eating disorders in adolescents. It is not enough when I see almost all of my friends at some point have suffered from an eating disorder. It is not enough and not enough action is taken. Not enough action is taken on eating disorders, and that needs to change. Because no one should have to go through that. I urge you, notice the people you care about. Notice if someone that you know stops eating certain meals. Notice if your friend is losing weight at a rapid rate, but doesn't inherently look unhealthy. Notice if a comment that you made one day was unnecessarily cruel. Notice if someone's just moving food around on their plate and not actually eating it. Notice these things because at age 16, there was a young girl that no one noticed these things for. And 10 years ago, there was a young girl that out there inevitably started to hear cruel comments from people. Eating disorders are a problem that are not taken seriously enough in our education system and in the actions that we take to prevent them. They are not taken seriously enough, and we need to do more than teach vocabulary definitions to students about words like anorexia and bulimia. We need to open up conversation, and we need to do more and have more conversations about the implications of eating disorders, both in school and at home. We need to do more. It was not until very recently that I looked in the mirror and I didn't see a stomach that was too big. I didn't see thighs that didn't have gaps between them. I saw myself, and that is all that mattered. Eating disorders are a problem that lasts a lifetime, and no one should have to undergo that. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren, for your vulnerability and for sharing your story with us. Our next speaker, Ryan Yin, is a type 1 perfectionist with a fascination with the human experience. He is here to tell us how to stop being perfect in a perfect world.
Perfectionism. It's such a simple idea. The idea that anything in life can be perfected in almost any given field. And here's the thing. I myself am a perfectionist, a type 1 Enneagram. And for those of you who don't know, a type 1 Enneagram is an idealist, a reformer, and above all else, someone who just sets insanely high standards of themselves. And while you might not consider yourself to be a perfectionist, it's definitely possible that you exhibit some perfectionist tendencies. And I probably know what you're thinking. Why would a perfectionist even be giving a TED Talk about the problems with perfection? And honestly, I don't even know that. But what I do know is that perfectionism is becoming more and more of a problem in our daily lives. Almost 30% of our population are estimated to be perfectionists. And that estimation also gave us a guess on the number of gifted students in high schools. And if you guys had to guess, that number might be somewhere higher. 40 to 50% maybe, 50 to 60% even. You know, these kids are working harder, and so they're setting these higher goals of themselves and higher standards in order to achieve those goals. And yet, you'd be wrong, because it's only 1%. Just kidding, it's 80%. I saw some of y'all were like, oh, 1%, how do they do that? No. In today's world, it's extremely common. And today I want to talk about the two main types of perfectionism. The first type is self-inflicted perfectionism. Self-inflicted perfectionism can be detrimental, but it's actually the least harmful of the two I'm about to talk about. That little voice inside your head telling you that the line you drew was too short, or that the curve you drew is the wrong angle, and then you're gonna have to restart your entire project. But self-inflicted perfectionism can also include you being hard on yourself when it comes to results you don't like or comparing yourself to others. For me, growing up, it was pretty common for me to compare myself to tennis teammates, students, peers, pretty much anybody that outscored me on anything. And specifically, I remember freshman year being unable to make my high school tennis team and losing to a lot of better players. I went really hard on myself. I went to the tennis courts pretty much every single day. And on Friday nights at 10 p.m. when others might be playing League of Legends or Fortnite, I was by myself on the courts just hitting. This type is detrimental, but it's also very short term. Project to project, it varies. And although you might lose a lot of time rewriting your essay or redoing your project, it's something your mind can recover from, and something that you can learn to be less harsh on yourself with over time. The second type, however, is socially prescribed perfectionism. Socially prescribed perfectionism is much more unhealthy and often accounts for a larger chunk of the mental health issues described with perfectionism. Socially prescribed perfectionism entails how you feel disappointed that you don't meet someone else's definition of perfect or their standards of perfect. When we inevitably fail, we might get punished or mistreated. And as a result of that, we tend to blame ourselves and put the blame on ourselves. If we do somehow manage to accomplish or meet those tasks or goals, then their standards continue to get raised and more unreasonable. The sense of failure, helplessness, and one's inability to improve will continue. And along with it, their mental and emotional stress will continue to grow over time as well. Our school system is where we begin to see both types of negative perfectionism begin to be displayed in worried and stressed students across the world. High school can be a hyper-competitive environment where you're constantly worried about test scores, GPAs, college admissions. And you can have constant anxiety worrying about how other people are doing better than you at any given time. A recent NYU study showed that almost 50% of students, high school students, reported feeling a great deal of stress on a daily basis, with most of them citing test scores, GPAs, and homework as their greatest sources of stress in their lives. Along with that, socially prescribed perfectionism also takes root throughout our childhood. This is mainly because parents and even teachers begin to set extremely high standards of their students and kids. Now, obviously, this is somewhat justified, right? They want to see their child succeed. They want to see their child go into a good career field, succeed in that career field, and then eventually retire and settle down. But on the other hand, that much mental stress and emotional anguish can have really bad negative repercussions on a kid. I think it's okay as a parent to want the best for your child, but also try to empathize with them, understand what their limits and boundaries are, and adapt to them, not to go after their imperfections. In today's world where everyone knows everything about each other, it can be extremely easy to get caught up in how others appear and their results or accomplishments rather than our own. Our society has come such a far way from its previous days. Perfectionism is now a bare minimum rather than a rare feat, and we're much more quick to judge on those who are unable to accomplish this bare minimum. I still think that perfectionists are some of the most hardworking, dedicated, and compassionate people that I've met throughout my life. But I think it's high time that we show ourselves a good amount of well-needed self-empathy. How do we do that, though? I think the main idea is to give ourselves some breathing room. Go easy on yourself when it comes to making mistakes or producing worse results than your peers. And also to focus on your own growth rather than on other people. In the words of one wise, great philosopher, Baby Keem, in competition with myself, I cannot lose. And for those who notice, yes, I did just quote a rapper in my TED Talk. But also, don't sweat it when other people do better than you on tests or quizzes or anything. Don't focus on because there's nothing productive about focusing on other people at all. Also, focus on short-term growth when it comes to self-improvement. Focus on day-by-day or step-by-step goals even when it comes to improving yourself rather than the big picture. Like a plant, your daily improvements won't be very noticeable, but also like a plant, you'll grow up much more motivated and much more genuine. As for socially prescribed perfectionism, the only way to treat it is to cut it off at the source. You can try to remove all the plastic in the ocean, but until you do something about the plastic in our rivers, the incoming flow of trash and plastic will be too much for anyone to handle. Similarly, the only way to cut off socially prescribed perfectionism is for those who set those extremely high standards and expectations to ease up and empathize. Children these days are almost powerless to negate the standards and comparisons set for them. But as a parent, it's actually pretty simple to do. Just cut down on the meaningless comparisons and standards and replace it with much more meaningful worth. In all seriousness, as children and as students, we need to get better at appreciating ourselves and focusing on growing on our own terms. And as a society, we need to get better at appreciating our children, not going after their imperfections, and letting them grow up in a world where mental and emotional stress aren't a daily thing. I love you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Now I know that I'm not the only person that struggles with being perfect. Frankesia Bartley, my fellow senior at Davidson Fine Arts, has been performing from a young age. She is here to let us know about a passion and talent of hers, spoken word. Please welcome her to the stage with her poem, Evolve.
Evolution. You've heard it in your classes. It's the reason we have all multiplied by the masses. The very nature of the present human comes from the past. The way we behave is based on the way our ancestors did to last. There's more to it, though, more to this routine of today. For every person is different, and we don't always obey. We're powerful, and we're ready to change our display in case there's, trouble in our way. The giveaway: it is possible to overcome. Our minds are capable of ideas that soar past the sun. Stay humble, stay true, but remember that evolution begins with you. Thank you.
Our next speaker is a freshman at Lakeside High School. She is the child of two physicians, which has provided her with an array of knowledge when it comes to professional diversity. Her talk, The Long-Lasting Effects of a Two-Physician Household, will give us some insight into her life. Let's all give her a warm welcome.
On a September morning in 2007, I opened my eyes on this planet Earth. I saw my dad giving anesthesia to my mom, and my mom was performing her own C-section. Just kidding. Here the story takes another twist. As I grew older, I began to realize the pressures and expectations of living in a household where medicine was a constant theme. When I was 4 years old, I accidentally cut my foot on a piece of glass. My mom rushed home and took me to the hospital where my dad worked. There, he stitched up my foot and he explained the process as he did it. With that, throughout the 14 years that I've been alive, each time that I have injured myself, in turn, I've also received a thorough explanation on how to treat it. Unfortunately, being a doctor is a demanding job. So from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., I don't get to see my mom or my dad. Over time, I had to force myself to become independent. After school, I'll usually arrive home to an empty house. To keep busy, I'll work on my homework, which thankfully I never required much help on. Then, the pandemic hit. Schools shut down. Everything stopped. But my parents didn't. They worked constantly, and to help them out, I took up chores around the house. I learned to cook, I learned to clean, and I learned to maintain a proper household. In addition to independence, I've also felt extremely pressured to live up to my parents' success. Starting from a young age, both my parents have been good at everything, whether that be school or sports or the creative arts. And most of my relatives assume that I'm that way as well. When they call, they'll ask, "What are you doing?" I'll simply respond, "Oh, nothing much." In return, I'll receive a breakdown of my parents' busy schedules and what they did when they were my age. Alongside that, I constantly think about what I can do to positively impact the world as my parents do. I feel that whatever I do, it can never amount to the magnitude of what they do. They save lives daily. They manage to juggle their hectic lives with their 2 kids, jobs, social obligations, and they still manage to be good at everything. Their excellence leads me to an idea of the person I aspire to be. In school, I'll maintain a high GPA, and I'll immerse myself in whatever I do, whether that be school or sports or music. Excellence is not the only thing I feel I've been pushed to accomplish. Since my parents themselves are both physicians, they have deliberately exposed the fields of healthcare to my older brother and I. Last summer, my mom enrolled me in a summer camp titled Mini Med School. No, I am not joking. Mini Med School. There we studied 9 hours per day, and each day was focused on one area of the body. My 22-year-old brother at Georgia Tech was contemplating his major during his early college years. He took up some extracurricular activities because he didn't have many when he was younger. Inevitably, he did end up pursuing a healthcare pathway. He explained to me that since medicine was the only thing he knew, he had no other professional experiences to base his decision off of. Since our household did not have any professional diversity, my brother chose the only path that he knew. Put simply, professional diversity means a variety in career. Some households have plenty of it or they have a lack of it. But it doesn't just specifically have to be 2 doctors, like in my case. It can be 2 exterminators or 2 veterinarians. A lack of professional diversity leads to a sense of tunnel vision. Like in my case, I only get exposed to a healthcare pathway, so I get 0 other exposure to other careers around me from home. Professional diversity in a household is necessary in order to maintain an idea of more than just one career. Obviously, I only get one perspective from home, but I still have time to decide on a career instead of just inevitably following my parents' path. Starting from a young age, I took it upon myself to forge my own path. I started taking dance classes, coding classes, and art classes, though those specific ones didn't go too well. I even tried exposing myself to more extracurricular activities as I grew older to prevent the dreaded tunnel vision. As I've had the opportunity to learn, professional diversity is a necessity in a household. And as you have had the opportunity to learn, exposing ourselves in such a way can be difficult. However, a growing student can take action to prevent these one-sided views. One can join free clubs, free organizations, and even try job shadowing. In middle school, I joined tons of clubs, and this gave me a chance to explore my interests as well as make new friends. Many cities do also offer educational programs for curious young students, and you can all research about these online. A lack of professional diversity should never limit you in any way. You must introduce yourself to professional diversity, whether it be present in your household or not. You owe it to yourself to become professionally diverse. To quote Albus Dumbledore, "It matters not what you are born, but who you grow to be." Thank you.
Thank you, Arushi, but I'm willing to trade parents with you if that means I will be passing anatomy. So just putting that out there for you, just in case you wanted to do that. Help me welcome our next speaker, an educator since 1997. Dr. John Cato holds a doctorate from Georgia Southern University, go Eagles. A teacher in mathematics and physics, he has research interests including identity and systems of logic. Please welcome Dr. John Cato and his talk, "It's Not Science Fiction, It's Future Science."
So, stories. Stories are how we share our creative, social vision. And it's also partly how we come about creating new science innovations and new technological innovations. And in order to do that, these stories are often told in the form of science fiction. We can trace these inspirations from science fiction as far back as Beowulf, an epic poem written many years ago. And we can see the inspirations from Beowulf in that epic and how epics really allow us to write and create worlds because they're so big and so expansive that the authors have the ability to create and envision a world and technologies that don't even exist yet. And I argue that the idea of the epic is still with us today, and it's the epic through which imagination allows us to keep creating and inventing new science, new technologies. And a good place to start is in the 1850s. We had a megalithic authors like Edmund Rice Burroughs. We had people like H.G. Wells. We had people like Jules Verne. And they created these giant, enormous volumes of new worlds. The amount of technology and creation that they put into these is enormous. And you might think that just those stories alone didn't have much of an impact on society, but I argue that you can start to see lots of the technologies that we have today starting in these points of time. For example, H.G. Wells in 1895 applied for a patent. And his patent was, I wrote this book called The Time Machine, and I really want to show people what it would look like traveling through my time machine. And so he applied for a patent, and although the patent didn't go anywhere, later on, the basis for that patent became what is now the IMAX. Also, if you look at Verne, he wrote a book called From Earth to the Moon. And in that, he knew enough physics to know that we would want to launch the rockets close to the equator to pick up speed so that we could get to space easier. He also knew that we would want to be near water so that if we had an accident, we could ditch into the water and not land on people. And even in the 1800s, he knew enough that the best place would probably be in Florida. So he put his rocket ship launch pad in Tampa. And you think that was 130 miles, and 100 years before, NASA put it at Cape Canaveral. And then if you fast forward until like the 1890s, there was these things called serials. They would put the serials at the beginning of a movie so that people would have to come back and buy another ticket to see what happened. There were long chapters of a saga, often with heroes and villains, and they very much followed the kind of epic format. One of the primary ones that you first learn of is called the flaming disc. And in the flaming disc, what you see is the bad guys would capture the sun's rays, they would focus it onto a safe, and they would burn a hole in it so they could steal the money. And if you think about it, what they were predicting in the 1890s was a laser. Another important serial that was kind of interesting, and I can never remember the whole name of it, I just call it Ralph. But it was a serial where the hero's girlfriend was kidnapped by a Martian. He flew around in outer space with her, so the hero had to track her, so he invented this series of arrays to see where they were going in outer space. And in 1935, when the father of the radar, Sir Watson Watt, when he applied for his U.S. patent, it was actually denied because it was too close to the movie contraption. So you can see that this impact that technologies had from science fiction is really important. Now, if you fast forward to like the 1900s, in about 1950, this is when science fiction really took off. And probably the two main ones were things like Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers. And there's too much to talk about in terms of what all was there, but some of the things you could see in those were things like focused energy beams. You can see what they called mole machines. You can also see what they had for all kind of gamma radiation and gamma radiation weapons, basically. And what that became later on was we basically had laser defense systems. We had the machines that would bore into mountains that would allow us to build roads and build trains. And then ultimately, our nuclear arsenal is gamma radiation weapons. And then if you flash forward to the 1960s, another serial-like type of, well, we started to switch more into movies, we've switched in more into TVs, but it's very much like the epic, which is Star Trek. Star Trek spanned many, many, many years, and in Star Trek, there were all kinds of innovations that ultimately became, down the road, part of our technology. For example, if you don't remember, one of the first things that Captain Kirk would do when he landed on a planet was he would whip out his cell phone, right? And then when Spock would get there, the first thing he would do is he'd use his smartphone to scan the planet and see what was going on. And then we had a 2001 Space Odyssey, when the astronauts were flying around, when they wanted to check on what was going on Earth, they would pull back up and look at their iPad. So these were all technologies that were predicted and written about and shown on TV and movies back in the 1960s. And then they showed up later for us, decades later, but I argue it was the ideas that were presented in these science fiction forms, mostly through these kind of epic-like things, that inspired the scientists to create these technologies. When I was 9, I saw my first talking car. It had the ability to talk, drive by itself. It could log in. It had its own GPS system. It could search through computer databases. But it wasn't a Tesla. It was a Pontiac. And it was the Knight Industry 2000 kit car. And if you remember that from the 80s, you know, this was the car that predated those types of things. And the lead actor in the story, Michael Knight, in order to talk to his car, had his iPhone, right? He could talk to it with his Apple Watch. So he could get Kit to drive around and do things, and they could solve crimes together. But all of these things were predicted and shown on TV in 1980s. And so I think it's really important for people to understand how much science fiction has influenced our daily life. You know, right now we're in this room and Wi-Fi is ubiquitous. We're surrounded by cell towers, microwaves. We could get out our phone. We can call anybody in the world. You can take your cell phone and you could find a restaurant in a town that you've never been in. I could take my cell phone and diagnose my stove. I mean, there's all kind of things we could do. And I argue, you know, if you think about what's going on today, I think in the future, all of us might be able to get together again and sit in a room and have another form of communication, but it won't be in this room exactly. It will be in that room, a virtual room. And that's where I think it's possible that we could go. If we're looking down the road, this is where technology is taking us. And if I could leave you one thing, one idea, it would be this. It's okay to be passionate about science, and there's nothing wrong with that. But don't be myopic to think that science can exist without the arts, because it's the arts that are writing science fiction. But that science fiction becomes future science.
Thank you, Dr. Cato. I will now watch Black Mirror through a different lens, so thank you so much. Our last speaker is a junior at Lakeside High School. Tejas Srinivasan gained his interest in space exploration in middle school. He is here to expose us to the 3 pieces of the spacefaring puzzle. Let's welcome Tejas.
The year is 2018. I'd moved into my new neighborhood, and I was able to enjoy a beautiful drive through incredible scenery on a road covered on both sides by nothing but trees. However, fast forward 3 years, and the landscape from that same road looked like this. As it turns out, a vast amount of forest had to be cleared to make way for some new apartment complexes. And this isn't just happening right next to my own backyard either, because if we look around, we can see that it's happening everywhere, right in front of our own eyes. As we can see, human population for much of known history, as in the last 10,000 years, has seen relatively stagnant growth. But in 1800, our population was 1 billion. 200 years later, bam, we're at 6 times that. This is due to very low death rates, incredibly high birth rates, which means that this growth, it isn't gonna stop anytime soon. As a matter of fact, guess how many people are gonna exist in 2050? It's going to be 10 billion people. That's a lot of people to call family, am I right? On one hand, that's a good thing. It means more brains, creativity, talent, intellect, ultimately, more possibilities for our civilization. But on the other hand, it's coming at a cost. It means we have to clothe, house, equip those 10 billion humans with the right tools. And on a planet with scarce resources, that inevitably leads to hatred, competition, war, destruction. Ultimately, the pillaging of landscapes. It's simply unsustainable to keep growing at this rate and stay on the same rock, Earth, for thousands more years to come. So, does this mean that the end of humanity is near? No. We're humans. Surely we can find a solution to our rather expansionist problems. And besides, it's not like we're going to let the fate of our own grandchildren slip right through our hands. We will find a place to sustainably expand our presence. But where? Well, it's got to be a place with infinite amount of space to expand, but also an infinite number of resources to obtain and exploit. And there's only one such place: space. But before we get to space, we need to know how we're going to get there and what we're going to do once we're up there. And in that, we're going to tackle challenges in 3 key areas: transportation, manufacturing, and energy, to build a solid foundation for a spacefaring species. So let's talk about transportation first, because you can't go out and build a spacefaring empire without getting to space first. I had the wonderful opportunity the other day to speak with Dr. Kevin Bocut, one of the lead scientists at Boeing, and we discussed what goes into an affordable space transportation system. And he informed me that it has to have 2 characteristics. The first, a high utilization rate, which means you have to use the vehicle as often as you do an airplane or eventually even a bus. And the second characteristic, complete reusability. Because as soon as you start throwing away parts of your rocket, that's millions, if not billions, of dollars down the drain. But as I dug a little bit deeper on my own, I discovered a third key area we need to focus on, and that's the fuel. Not only do we have to make it very efficient, but we need to also make sure it's accessible wherever we colonize. An example, we could use lunar soil to produce hydrogen rocket fuel, or parts of the Martian atmosphere to make methane rocket fuel. Okay, so we have our cool fancy rocket, but what's the point of having one if there's nowhere to go? When we get to where we want to go in space, we got to build important infrastructure, like housing, which brings us to our second key area in space exploration, manufacturing. But we have to also talk about where are we going to get the materials to build this stuff? After all, you don't see Home Depot setting up shop in space anytime soon, do you? We got to get our materials from somewhere in space. But that somewhere could be one of 2 places. The first, asteroids. Not only are 2.5 quintillion tons of the stuff just floating around between Jupiter and Mars, but it's also not useless old rock either. Well, unless you consider gold and platinum useless. And most importantly, asteroids may contain water, the lifeblood of you, me, and everybody else in this room. The second place we could get our space resources from is the planet we're already heading to. We could just mine it up. We could mine Neptune for helium, Europa for ice, Mercury for raw materials, or Mars for Mars chocolate bars. So we got our cool fancy rocket, and we got the stuff to build things in space. What will we build? Using newly refined manufacturing techniques like 3D printing, we will build incredible megastructures, large modular space stations designed to rotate, to generate centrifugal gravity. But we will also build homes, offices, museums, entire cities on the surfaces of planets as well. Imagine, if you will, going out at night, setting up your telescope and seeing vast cities light up the dark Martian night. Wouldn't that be incredible to see? Which brings us to our final key area in space exploration, energy. Building incredible megastructures is one thing, but powering them is a completely different matter. Because without energy, the populations of even the most advanced spacefaring nations would be as good as dead. So, where do we get our energy in space? Well, as always, it depends. Are you near the sun? Well, you could build cheap solar panels and put them in orbit for fresh, reliable solar rays. Do you find yourself near a gas giant? You could fancy some helium for nuclear fusion, or tap into that 1,000-mile-an-hour wind energy. Because no matter the destination, there's always a way. The sooner we start working together on the solid spacefaring foundation, the sooner we start putting together these pieces of the puzzle, the less risk we're putting on the future of our own species, and the more opportunities we'll get to create, explore, expand beyond our wildest dreams. When I initially investigated this topic, I happened to find that these three areas, transportation, manufacturing, and energy, will be our guiding light in space exploration and colonization. But there may also be many smaller challenges in other fields we'll encounter along the way. What we do know for sure is that there are more challenges we will face, but also more solutions we will find. But in order to find those solutions, we must work together, not as Americans or Russians or even Ukrainians, but as humans. Because, as Neil Armstrong once said, one small step for man is one giant leap for mankind. Thank you.
Okay, let's give all of our speakers another round of applause, please. They were all so amazing, worked so hard. Now we will hear some closing remarks from Sharma Pogala. We are indeed lucky to have him as a distinguished Toastmaster and co-organizer. This is his first ever TEDx Youth event, so let's give him a nice welcome.
Congratulations to all of you. You guys made it a great event. Please give them a round of applause one more time. I think I approached it to a senior level that they asked me to give the closing remarks. I think I qualified for that age right now. This is a great event. First time happened in Augusta. This is made possible by our youth. They made this such a great plan and organization and made this possible to all of us. Such a great event, I cannot give a closing remarks that easy. But somebody told me while coming down, the closing remarks should be like a latest fashion. Long enough to cover the subject, short enough to be interesting. So I will make it a brief. I don't mean that way, but I will make it brief. The purpose of TEDx talk is to inspire the curiosity, ignite the new ideas, and empower the youth. I think this platform serves the great purpose to express their willingness for future ideas and share with the community and with the world, with the TEDx. I really appreciate and applaud all these young men and women. Some of them I call it kids because I saw them when they were this small and they grew up this tall right now. And they really amaze me, the talent they have, the ideas they have, how they wanted to form the future of all of us, change to all of us. Today you heard from them the new ideas of how to treat diseases. You heard from them how to detect the problems of eating disorders. You heard from them the liposomes, how it can carry the drugs to the body where it belongs, where it has to go. And you also heard from them the space explorations. They are thinking about colonizing outside. I don't know where I can find my grandson next time. But all these ideas going to change our future. It's going to happen. This is the platform which can give them to share those, and then you all can hear and make this carried on to the future so that we can see it in life. 4 years back, I was in the Gavel Club talking to the members, and Ria was one of them. I shared with them that one day my dream is to all of you to speak in a TEDx talk one day. Ria took it so seriously, she made that as her dream. And she worked hard, make this team together and make this event possible. I really applaud her. Ria is an amazing leader and an effective communicator. She's going to become a big leader one day. I got to keep her address handy for future. You are amazing audience today. Without your support, without your motivation, without your presence here, it would have not been successful at all. I thank you so much for that. And one thing I want to say, you're all a rich audience because every one of you looks like bought 3 seats and it made the hall full. Every one of you got 3 seats, I think. All right. That's what I feel, that you're all are very keen to listen to the young kids. And whatever you learned today, please take it, do something with it. Encourage the kids. Encourage them to participate. My last hope is that we adults got a lot of responsibility to give them opportunity to the kids. And I want to continue this TEDx talk with other kids for many years to come. That's what I see in my future. And I want your support for this. I thank all the sponsors who really helped us monetarily. And Ria knows much about it, more than me. But I know that your help has made this possible. And one thing I want to say is please encourage kids, motivate them to participate in this. We want to see more number of kids coming forward hereafter from next year onwards. Like Franklin D. Roosevelt said one time, we cannot always prepare future for the young kids, for the youth, but we can prepare the youth for the future. So take that with you and hope to see you all next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pogola. It was off, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Pogula. And before we all leave, I just wanted to remind you of there's still shirts outside that y'all should purchase, and remind you of the networking that you can do in the lobby when you leave. You never know who you might meet. You might meet Rhea, who's a great leader, or Ryan, who's a perfectionist, or Amber, who is very, very friendly, or me, who's all of the above. So, but now a few words from our organizers.
First of all, I want to thank you all for joining. Although this TEDx event and all TEDx events are usually limited to 100 attendees, we hope that all 100 of you have taken a lot from this event and will use it in your future, the new perspectives of the youth, and everyone that talked today during the intermission and beyond. And although Mr. Sharma thanked a few key members, organizers, speakers, we want to be a little bit more specific with the impact that a few of them have had. Thank you.
TEDx Youth at Lake Olmsted would not have been possible without our vast team of volunteers, students, professionals, and supporters throughout the Augusta community. From August of last year until now, we have been working tirelessly to put together this platform for our youth to share their ideas in a collaborative and open-minded setting. Today was our final product long in the making, and we are so grateful to have had the resources and dedication necessary to organize an event of this scale. Of course, a huge thank you goes out to our sponsors who provided us the materials necessary to put this event together. Thank you to NDI for covering and coordinating this absolutely incredible plug-and-play venue of the Georgia Cyber Center. Thank you to TR Ready and Snack Properties for their generous donations that enabled us to purchase all our supplies and merchandise. Thank you for the contributions of the many other anonymous donors. Without the support of our sponsors, our TEDx event would never have been a reality, and we are deeply grateful for their help.
Before you had the pleasure of viewing our speakers' talks today, each and every one of them went through a full application process, interview, and several virtual and in-person rehearsals, as we worked closely with them to perfect their script and speech. Our distinguished Toastmasters, which is the highest recognition the Toastmaster International bestows for individuals who demonstrate superior communication skills and leadership. Mr. Pogula Sharma, Mr. Dick McCoppin, Mrs. Laura Olson, and Mrs. Lisa Coleman. They coached our students weekly on the proper public speaking techniques you saw demonstrated today. The organizing volunteers and speakers thank every one of you for your time, expertise, kindness, as everyone observing your interactions with the students learned something valuable. And our speakers performed beautifully today as a result of your mentorship. Thank you all to our talented speakers who presented today. Obviously, without you, there is no TEDx Youth at Lake Olmsted. We appreciate your passion, your vulnerability, your bravery to stand on that red carpet today and share your stories with the community. Additionally, we thank the parents of all of our youth speakers for raising and supporting your kids to be smart, genuine, courteous, as we have observed over the past few months. We know that you are as proud of them as we are today.
I would also like to thank Dr. Owen and Dr. Cato, our two adult speakers who are teachers at Lakeside High School, for your support of your students' endeavors and for taking time out of your busy schedules to write and rehearse these innovative talks we just heard. Your service to the students of the Augusta community is vital, and the lessons you and your fellow teachers impart to the younger generation was evident in every speaker's talk today. Thank you on behalf of everyone for the knowledge, dedication, and mentorship you give every day. Thank you to the Georgia Cyber Center, specifically Ms. Erica and Mr. Todd, for trusting us to use your space and supporting our efforts to arrange this event. We are indebted to your organization, correspondence, and kindness. Thank you to all of our hardworking volunteers for putting this together today. Thank you for showing up nearly, oh yeah, you can clap for them. Thank you for showing up nearly 3 hours early, for your patience, your efficiency, and your service to your community. Each of you was an integral part to running this event, and we would not have been able to do this without you.
Thank you to you, the audience, for taking the time out of your busy lives to listen to our youth share ideas for the future. The goal of TEDx is to spark conversation, connection, and community. Without you, that is impossible. Thank you for listening and engaging today, and we hope you learned something new to adapt into your day-to-day routines in our community. Finally, the organization of TEDx Youth at Lake Olmsted was almost entirely student-run, with our adult sponsor being Mr. Pogula Sharma, who we once thank again for his support. I would like to thank the organizing team standing with me for their hours of dedication to curating all aspects of today's event. And lastly, thank you to our organizer, Ria Verma. Thank you for your service in the Augusta community, for pioneering the first ever TEDx Youth event in Augusta history, and for being the change you wanted to see, and I think we all wanted to see in our community. Thank you on the behalf of everyone in this room for making this happen.